As part of a series of conversations we at Web Purify have been having with experts on trust and safety topics, today we're discussing the implications of Australia's recent ban on social media for under 16s. I'm thrilled to welcome a true expert in youth wellness and digital engagement. Currently studying at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, she focuses on how children, teens, and young adults develop and learn, with an eye towards applying this knowledge in the tech world. I've had the immense pleasure of working with Natasha Ahmed at TikTok, where she served on the European Public Policy team and later as Global Policy Manager for the Youth Safety and Wellbeing Policy team, shaping child safety policies. Beyond TikTok, she's worked with Five Rights, advocating for children's digital rights, and the UK's Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, where she influenced national online safety policies. With her expertise at the intersection of policy, technology and youth development, Natasha is here to share her invaluable insights on the implication of Australia's landmark decision and what it means as other jurisdictions consider similar measures. Natasha, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. And thank you to Web Purify as well for inviting me. I feel honored to be able to talk about this particular topic in a bit more detail with you.
Amazing. Well, look, let's dive right in. What's your take on Australia's decision to ban social media for under 16s? What do you think drove this move?
Yeah. Um, it's clear that this particular issue is really contentious and it's a very contentious decision. And I think for me, looking at this, it sparked a lot of debate amongst policymakers, educators, and digital rights advocates. The way I see it is that while it's intended to address concerns around mental health and safety, many experts in digital well-being and youth advocacy, such as, Professor Amanda Third, who's Australian herself, and Collier, lots of other advocates view it as a step that actually ignores the nuanced understanding that these fields provide. So I think the decision is kind of largely motivated by the desire to fix broader social issues, particularly those linked to young people's mental health and social media use. However, I believe this particular issue requires a bit more of an informed approach.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than a direct ban, I would have advocated for more empirical research and understanding the true role of social media, which I believe, I come from the tech world, but I'm not so biased. I think being in academic sphere has kind of led me at all to leaning more into empirical research. But I think social media is definitely more of a tool rather than a cause, and understanding that's quite vital. So addressing these deeper societal issues collaboratively with youth could lead to more effective outcomes. So that's my take on it. And I think the move and the drive towards it is really because there's a lot of fear from policymakers, from parents and caregivers, from families, from society around, young people, they need helping and they need saving. And I think its intention was good, but it was slightly misguided.
Yes, that's really interesting. And I suppose when we think about the impact on youth wellness, you mentioned it there, the rather polarized views that have come out, with experts either vigorously celebrating the ban or fiercely criticizing it. From
Yeah.
your experience, what are the biggest challenges social media poses for teens' mental health?
Firstly, you're right around polarization. But secondly, believe focusing solely on the challenges for, of social media on teens is actually a bit limiting. I think instead we should explore how to best support teen development and psychology and the way they grow and learn online in the context of social media. So in my last semester, I've been learning about loads of different theories, and there's one particular theory called self-determination theory, and it provides a really great framework for this particular question. This theory states that individuals thrive when their needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness are met. And I think on social media, the way that they can reframe these challenges is by fulfilling these particular three basic needs. For example, algorithmic feeds can limit autonomy by controlling content exposure, while social comparison itself can can really impact feelings of competence. And so to address these kind of wider societal challenges and also specific challenges to youth, we need to prioritize like youth agency and user agency, and help kind of shape their online experience to make sure it's kind of safer and more empowering. I think that we should also explore design solutions that foster autonomy, so that agency aspect, and as well as healthy social connections. And again, leaning back into conducting empirical research to understand how social media platforms as a whole can better meet the evolving needs of teens in particular.
Yeah, and I mean, exactly. And like, there's been a lot of focus on, let's say, the challenges that social media, but it's quite clear that there are
Yeah.
benefits there as well. And, maybe you could talk a little bit about that. What are the benefits that are going to be taken away from
Mm.
from teens as a consequence of a potential ban like this?
Yeah, great question, because I think there is so much kind of valuable joy that can come from social media, especially when young people use it. So for me, because I'm at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, I kind of lean into education being key, and a really integral part of why young people come onto social media or entertainment platforms or platforms where they can engage with one another. So yes, of course, education, civic engagement. Um, I think, being in America and being there with the kind of election going on, it's clear that like the civic engagement aspect is palpable, and young people are coming online to actually engage civically. And I think, why would we take that away from them? And of course, personal expression. I think social media and platforms, like TikTok, provide a really great platform for young people to share their voices and, connect with diverse perspectives, and also engage with media is also a fundamental right. So I believe in the 1990s, Australia did ratify the United Nations Convention on Rights of the Child. I think Article 12 is basically saying like young people should have the right to access information from media. So basically leaning back into education. So there's a huge benefit there.
They are looking to make a carve out, like an exception for education,
Yeah.
which is of course to be welcomed. Of course, then the debate becomes around how do you define what is educational and who's going to set those parameters.
I fully agree there. But I think, the personal expression and education, the intersection there is really interesting. So when someone talks about their lived experience, like they've gone through something and they've come out the other side, that for me, I'm informed on a topic that I didn't know about, and I'm being educated and I'm learning. And so when young people are going online and learning about experiences that they haven't experienced themselves, I think that is education. And so what better to come online and kind of experience those diverse voices? And, it really is a source for joy. I think a lot of the time when we focus on developing policies and safeguards, we kind of forget that young people should experience joy and fun as well, and creativity. They're not just passive consumers, they are creators, and they are beings who create and perpetuate joy. So I think that's a huge benefit for social media that we shouldn't ignore.
Absolutely. And like they're the next generation of users, of adult users of the internet.
Yeah.
So they, much like you have to learn how to drive before you become a road user, there is, this idea of, let's say, ensuring that people are educated in terms of, internet social media use is actually really important. You
Mm.
don't just like say, oh, on particular date, you have to, you're suddenly able to drive your
Yeah.
car on the road. You build up towards that. So, and I suppose you touched on there about, let's say, um, teens' ability to be creators, to engage with civic society, with civic issues, which is incredibly important. What about their ability to form relationships and navigate adolescence in the digital world? Do you see these bans affecting that important societal skill?
Yeah. Again, a great question, and I love this topic. Um, Kind of nerding out a little bit. When I was at TikTok, I worked with a lot of developmental psychologists, and now I'm here at Harvard. We do a lot of work around developmental psychology and how a young person grows. And adolescence is such a great area of life to study because it's such a great period of significant social and emotional development. And peer relationships and relationship play such a crucial role in identity formation, and social emotional learning. And just general overall well-being. And so bans limit those opportunities for that social interaction and exploration. And it kind of hinders their ability to navigate the complexities of social relationships too, as well. When I was in class, one of my professors was like, the way that we ensure that young people critically think is giving them spaces to make decisions. And I think that's so pertinent, especially when we're thinking about relationships. So I think instead of bans, we need to be thinking about emphasizing the importance of scaffolding, supporting teens in their online interactions. And by doing so, we need to look at developmental psychology, to try and like design resources to help them, or guidance to help them develop like healthy online relationships and habits. Because I think that there are a lot of young people who are still figuring out who they are, and they come online to explore that part of themselves, and they find others who are also doing the same thing too. And I think taking away the opportunity to navigate the online world and also find friendships and find relationships is super important. And I think also there is a lot of fear around, I'm going to say it like, sex and relationships, but actually relationships and friendships are formed through, engaging and connecting with each other. And maybe we shouldn't fear so much that those two separate things. Maybe we should really look to foster relationships online and see how we can do that. But by banning it, you're kind of immediately saying, no, these relationships that you form online are bad. It's a binary.
That's absolutely, it's really interesting. And to be fair, it's not even an education that teens could learn from. It's also like
No.
all users of digital spaces could benefit from education around forming relationships online, and the value of them, and the pitfalls as well.
Yeah.
Do you think that there could be, new platforms or tools that might step in to fill this gap if a ban like this came into place? Like, could this spark innovation in another area? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, since starting kind of working in the digital online world when I was working for the UK government, from then, which is how many years ago, 2019, or 2018, let me say, the digital landscape has like evolved so much since then. And there's such a growing number of platforms. Actually, when I joined, TikTok didn't even exist,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. So like, there's such a growing number of platforms that are really designed specifically for young people. And actually, maybe this ban is moving towards more innovative platforms with a focus specifically on user safety and well-being, and also developmentally optimal experiences, for young people with the potential to offer like really valuable alternatives. I think that there are some really cool ed tech initiatives coming up where, and they are powered by AI, but they're really focused on kind of educating young people, educating users, but doing it in a really fun and gamified way. There's ways to learn language now. I mean, even look at like Duolingo, things like that. There are ways that young people can go online. I think the missing piece of the puzzle is how do we do that with social media? And I think that if you have a platform that really prioritizes the agency of their user, the well-being and needs of young people, I think there will be loads of really, really, really cool platforms, innovative platforms that kind of like step in and fill the gap. But I also think going back to the point around research is that we still don't know, what well-being or like good well-being looks like for young people in this space. So maybe we can also lean into more research around innovative ideas around, developmentally optimal content design, digital literacy education, AI powered moderation, and how can we use all of those different factors to develop a really innovative tool that centers young people at the start of their design, really, rather than a kind of afterthought.
What I love about that as well is that, look, who are the likely people to be the innovators here? Is it going to be the adults, or is it actually going to be the young people themselves? And I think that we're kind of sometimes that they're missing that opportunity that, you know, the next founders of the next big thing, you probably heard me say this many a time, Tash, was like some of them haven't even been born yet, you know.
No.
Some of them are in primary school or in secondary school. You know, and they will be the next they are the next creators, they are the next founders. They're the ones who actually may end up being the ones solving for this. So kind
Yeah.
of being open-minded to that, to make space for them to learn the landscape so that they can lean in to their, I suppose, creator destiny as such.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I fully agree.
Moving on a little bit then to, let's say, around, people are talking non-stop about age verification methods, and they've been doing so for years, and there's loads of
Yeah.
complications around it. And we understand that, it's a problem that hasn't been solved for just yet, but a real push on that. What's the most practical way to enforce age restrictions on social media?
Enforcing any age restriction is super complex. I think there is no single solution because, I mean, we look at politics now, there isn't a single solution for any of the kind of wider socio-political issues that we face in our society. So it won't work for all users and for all platforms. So I think a multifaceted approach is really necessary. And it consistently needs collaboration with policymakers, with, you know, tech, with educators, parents, and youth advocates. Um, so potential way of like a quick fix is a device-based age verification
Mhm,
mechanism.
mhm.
And I think that leans into a bit of difficulty because a lot of other companies will see like, okay, well, then the onus is only on us. And I think that's really difficult if it's not been mandated by the government and things like that. So I do wonder how easy it is. For me, in my mind, I'm like, that's really practical. And I think that would work because I've spoken to a lot of parents who say, you know, I'm trying to enforce an age restriction on my phone, on my laptop, and like, how do I do that? When my child uses my phone as well, or my child uses my iPad and things like that. So there are difficulties when I think about that most practical thing. But I think if we do think about this multifaceted approach, we can, you know, prioritize um, youth and user privacy, you know, data security, but in the development and implementation of age restrictions. I always also wonder if we should go back to the root of the issue, which is that there are people who want to come online and engage online. So if we are looking to if we're looking at their age, maybe we should think about before they come online, do we have enough digital literacy kind of programs for these young people to critically think when they are online? So the platforms are keeping them safe, but they also have some critical thinking skills, digital literacy skills, and parents and caregivers also have those tools as well, because it's not just one person that's raising a child, it's all of us, right?
Absolutely. And
And so we all
oftentimes,
have a part to play, right?
yeah, and oftentimes, it's the children who are explaining to their parents what
Right.
buttons to click in order to facilitate, these accesses, or indeed limit them, So it is a difficult one. Like, but there has to be an emphasis on digital literacy, particularly for those folks who are in charge. But then that
Agreed.
responsibility also, so it's a little bit like, restricting young people from drinking alcohol. Okay, as in caregivers and parents have obviously a responsibility there, but you also expect, if your underage child goes to the off license, that they won't be able to purchase the alcohol, that that there is a shared responsibility there, and that is is regulated. The owner of that off license will get into trouble if they sell alcohol to a young person, without having sought identification verification. So, it is a tricky one. But do we see stricter age verifications systems creating friction between parents and teens? Teens potentially, smart, maybe manipulating the abilities, just to get access. What does that friction look like?
I think there's like a two-part answer to that question. And I think one leans into like what stricter age verification means for our society and what it also means for the kind of microcosm of families and that particular community. And I think there are some considerations. I've worked a lot with asylum seekers and refugees who don't have papers and who don't have identity documents. And so a lot of the stricter age verification will take, identity cards and things like that, and try and strip the age from that. Now, people who don't have identity cards and verify their age and who they are, it's really difficult. And then you're limiting access. So with them, we're creating more of an inequitable society yet again, and the internet wasn't necessarily created for that. So I think that there's wider ethical concerns that I have for stricter age verification, and if there's a way that we can try and limit the inequities, I think that's something that I'd be really advocating for. Secondly, on the second point is that absolutely there is friction between families who want to restrict when or if their child even goes online. And I've spoken to a number of parents. I'm not a parent myself, but I've spoken to a number of parents, whether that's in research or whether that's informally. And I realized that, of course, they deeply care. They want to protect their child. They're not going to let their child go off into the street and be like, okay, bye then. So they want to feel that when they go online that they're safe. But I think the missing piece is like vernacular. Like, how do they approach a conversation with their young person if they don't really understand the platforms, they don't know how they work? So I think it's like a two-part thing. It's like communication. It's like, how do you start a conversation? And often than not, young people are looking for, active involvement in their lives that is interested, but not too interested. Teens are like growing in autonomy, but they want their parents to care for them, sure, and their families to care for them. But they kind of want their parents to also understand the platforms that they're engaged with. So could you have communication or conversations with your child, which gives them parameters of like their online experience, talks to them and gives them agency to explore that, but at the same time, kind of is involved with that world. It's hard, it's a balance, and I know, not everyone has the right way of communicating, but I think that's the kind of when I was at TikTok and working with parents and families, that was the kind of the key thing is communication.
Absolutely, and it's such a valid point. And parents almost scaremongering themselves to a certain extent. We wouldn't do that when it comes to, let's say, playing a sport. You would accept that, like, if your child wants to participate in a like contact sport, let's say like rugby or lacrosse, there are certain risks in place that you're aware of. You don't just stop your child from participating in something that they really want to do. You make sure that the safeguarding is there, that any sort of risks are mitigated, whether that is wearing a gum shield or wearing a
Yeah.
protective helmet. They're approaching it, and also understanding the rules of the game. So I think, yeah,
Exactly.
everybody has to be like, I think we keep coming back to this, the importance of education here, and
Yeah.
I don't think it can be underset. You
Yeah.
mentioned there about disparate impact. You talked about the disparate impact of some of these decisions, and how they really can, restrictions like this, they really hit certain groups more than others. Like low income, like
Mm.
families who not everybody in the household has a device of their own.
Yeah.
Also like rural teens, um, who might depend on these online relationships to have community. Um, would you agree with that, that some people are hit harder than others?
I think I would agree with it. When we do research, we often look at, the US, or we look at specific countries in Europe, and then we generalize based on that data. And I think what's really exciting is new emerging research coming from a kind of, I suppose, countries or places that have been like largely ignored in data sets when we make these decisions. And I think, yeah, for sure, like a lot of the conferences I've gone to and people I've spoken to are really passionate about this, which is that we can't restrict young people who don't have access to, like I said, identity cards, or they're in spaces where they are displaced. And there are a lot of young people who've been born and raised in refugee camps, not in their home country, but in a host country. And I think specifically of those people. They'll have a device because there'll be organizations be like, okay, we'll give everyone phones and they'll be connected to the internet. But then with these verification systems where they might not be able to get an ID card because they are born in a refugee camp, then we're already limiting access. And that this is really looking at real life issues today. When we think of communities, we often think of the one that we're kind of existing in. And of course, I live in the UK and I also live in the US, super industrialized. But I haven't experienced displacement like a lot of young people that I've worked with have. So I think about them every time I'm thinking about the work that I do. And I'm like, well, will this restrict access for them? Yes. Is this inequitable? Yes. So yeah, to your point, these restrictions do hit harder in certain groups. And when we think about Australia, I think that there is obviously a huge rural community as well in Australia, who we don't know because there isn't enough data around what these restrictions mean for them. So I say yes, it does. It will definitely restrict or hit, certain groups. But I want there to be more of a focus on that because we all often think about high income communities and social groups, and we generalize findings across kind of across those
Mhm.
from those particular groups.
I often think of, let's say, young people in marginalized groups who are
Yeah,
discovering their identity, discovering who they are, discovering their
exactly.
sexuality, and
Yeah.
may not have access to a supportive community in that, and having that space online, um, it, it could save their life. Um,
Oh, absolutely.
so it's so important that those communities are remembered in these kind of policy decisions. Moving on, I suppose we talked about, like, you mentioned there very eloquently about the cultural differences as well. Like, what challenges do these bans face in accounting for cultural differences around age appropriate content? It's one of the things I grapple with a lot because, you know,
Yeah.
I am a parent. Now, I'm a parent of very young children who aren't yet engaged with, online content. They certainly don't know how to use my phone. Like some of my daughter, just turned one of her favorite things to do is, swiping through the phone, photos on my phone. So, she is a digital native for sure.
Yeah.
But I struggle with the future in terms of, okay, if somebody is making a decision around age appropriate content, who gets to make that decision? Who gets to decide what's age appropriate for my kids or not? And I want to make sure that I have an input there. But I think a lot of parents would think of those things as well, because some parents might be maybe more conservative in their approaches
Yeah.
and may have different expectations of what is age appropriate than, let's say, I might have. So is that something that you have thought about?
Yeah, I have to give kudos to you because when we worked at TikTok, I think that you did this really well, which is that you always brought in diverse voices to make informed policy decisions. And I think, when we're thinking about content, it's one piece of the puzzle. But I think if we think about the broader ecosystem that is the online world and making decisions, we need those voices to be brought in. And you brought me in often to talk about these things, and we come from different places. So I think that is one part of the jigsaw, which is like, okay, are we leaning into local expertise? Are we actually working with researchers who understand the issues so well? So to your point, absolutely. Kind of concepts around developmentally optimal or age-appropriate content can really vary significantly across cultures and communities. And what is considered appropriate for one group of young people may not be considered appropriate for another. So these blanket bans on content and platforms, I don't think really address these cultural nuances. This one size fits all approach can really restrict information and cultural resources for some people. So I think we really need to emphasize the importance of cultural sensitivity and inclusivity in the development and implementation of policies related to social media. And of course, we're both, keen policy nerds. And so I think we lean into our policy, but it goes hand in hand, policy and product design as well. And going back to my first point is we really need to engage the communities that experience this and understand their perspectives. And I think that's one thing that when we were working at TikTok, we kind of did really well. Some of these platforms do really well, which is like, okay, we have this idea for, this policy for looking at this piece of content or this generalized area. Let's test it. Let's not just use the data that we have and then design the policy. Let's actually work with local communities, parents and caregivers, young people themselves as well, and test this policy, test this product. And that way we can iterate with the cultural sensitivity in mind. So the challenge I have with this ban is that it doesn't really account for those cultural differences, which is really joyful around kind of age appropriate content. And we really need to develop more culturally responsive educational resources and policies and programs that address these unique needs of different communities.
If these bans go global, how might they change the way teens use technology and consume information? Could you imagine a world where these, unregulated platforms suddenly become popular, and what risks would that bring?
I think as soon as you said that question, I thought immediately, my mind immediately goes to unregulated platforms. So I remember when I was working for the UK government, we spoke to a bunch of teens and we're like, okay, at the time we were like trying to age restrict porn. And we were just, it was like, okay, we were talking to them about this and I remember they were like, well, we'll just use a VPN. Like, we don't care. And I was like, oh, okay, right. So they will find a way, transgress the bans that is put on them because young people are super innovative, they're creative, and they're intelligent. And sometimes we forget these things, right? When we're designing bans. So if they go global, they absolutely will change the way that young people consume, look for information, access information, connect with each other, as well as engage with the world around them. Because they'll find a way to access other platforms which potentially may not have their interests in mind. Okay. They're unregulated. They might not have a great trust and safety cohort of people who are looking out for them. So I think that they may develop new methods of communication and information sharing. And of course, that means potentially increasing their exposure to harmful interactions, harmful content, lots of online risks, which they may not have known when they went onto that platform, because you don't necessarily know what all the risks are when you go onto a specific platform. So
absolutely. And any of the thoughtful supports that currently exist on lots of social media platforms, because they have trust and safety teams who are working really hard to make sure that these kind of supports are available. Certainly there wouldn't be much of that to be found in the unregulated world.
With the unregulated world, it's not even that. They may have regulations for that specific platform, but they're not designing with young people in mind. Mm-hmm. And I think having specific youth safety teams in some of these social media platforms or entertainment platforms, we are thinking about young people every day, which is like, is this optimal for them? Have we designed this experience for them? And when they go into another platform that hasn't thought about that, well, then you're not going to get that experience. So I think that it will for sure change the way that they use technology and consume information, but also change the way that they go and look for these sorts of information too. So I think it is really worrying, and I'm a little bit concerned actually about if this does go global, what will happen, what will the repercussions be and the consequences be for this particular area.
What piece of advice, one piece of advice, would you give to regulators, tech companies, um, or indeed parents on this issue?
I feel like for my Harvard friends, this is not going to come as a surprise, but there's this one particular line that we are taught often when we're thinking about research, which is nothing about us without us.
Mhm.
And so for me, that really is like fundamental to ensuring that any policies, any interventions have young people at the heart of it. And that means discussions with them, and hand in hand designing these interventions with them. So, making sure that we are co-creating young people to be advocates for their own like online safety and well-being. So nothing about us without us is the one piece of advice I'd love to give to regulators, tech companies, parents.
That is a fabulous way to close this out. Thank you, Natasha, so much for this wonderful opportunity to discuss this topic, which is very clearly close to both of our hearts. I am so excited to learn more about your studies in Harvard on these issues related to teens. And I'm so grateful for your time today.
Thank you, Leish, and thank you for Purify as well for inviting me.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you.